Hello everybody. Let's talk about some books. Hello, my name is Tommy. Thank you for joining me here on Moonstone Makes. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of April. It was 9 books. I read 9 books in April, and I'm excited to talk about them because they were wonderful. The first book I read in April is one that I picked up from my local library, and it is called The Strange Library by Haruki Murakami. I found this when I went to the library one day and found a whole table dedicated to books about libraries. Mostly it kind of just looked like books with library in the name. I think it was National Library Month or something like that. I'm not sure. But I saw this, which is a Haruki Murakami book that I have never read and I had never heard of. Haruki is one of my favorite authors. I haven't read all of his books, but I've read most of them, and I love them. So when I saw this one, it's very small and thin and kind of cool looking. I was really intrigued. I picked it up and I brought it home and I read it in like under 2 hours. It's very short and it's awesome. So one of the cool things about this book is you kind of have to get the physical copy because it's like a multimedia experience as well as a short, very short novel. So the cover opens up like this, and this is the first page. I'm just going to read you the first page. Like, I saw this in the library and I was like, that's really giant text and a really short book. Like, I'm going to get through this really fast. Here's the first page. 1. The library was even more hushed than usual. My new leather shoes clacked against the gray linoleum. Their hard, dry sound was unlike my normal footsteps. Every time I get... And then that's all I'm going to read you. But the text in this book is very chunky. Also, it's illustrated. On almost every page, there are these very cool illustrations. And it's just a really, really neat reading experience. And all the while, you've got these things flapping at you. I use them as bookmarks. It's a very cool reading experience. Now, it's about a young boy who goes to a library. Turns out he becomes imprisoned in this library, and it's about him and the people he meets in this library prison and how he tries to escape. It's a very weird, surreal sort of fantasy book. If you know Murakami, it's got a lot of his common elements and themes that run through a lot of his books. There's magical realism. There are characters that feel like character studies of his own characters in this book. There's a very small number of players in this book, but they all feel really familiar. His main characters often are a boy who feels kind of lost and lonely. There is the sheep man in this book, which is a reoccurring character in his other novels as well. And there's a young woman who can't talk, and she also cannot be seen by everybody. She really reminded me of the girl from The Village Beyond the Forest in Kafka on the Shore. So there's just a lot of Murakami-ness in this really short, really quick read, and I highly recommend it. If you're into Murakami and you haven't read it yet, definitely try to pick up a physical copy of it, maybe at your local library. But beware! No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, and if you've never read Murakami before, I would say this is probably an okay place to start because it's super fast and you're not committing yourself to like a giant, intense, immersive experience of the whole Murakami world. It's a really quick, impactful little experience, but it is still packed with amazing imagery, metaphors, and a really strong story about isolation, loneliness, and feeling lost. Okay, so yes, definitely 5 stars. I loved it. I'm so happy I read it. Nights at the Circus is the next book that I read. This is an Angela Carter novel. This is my second Angela Carter novel, and I loved it so much. I didn't love it quite as much as The Magic Toy Shop. I think that's like one of my all-time favorite books now, but this one is so, so good. It's another kind of weird, winding, fantasy-esque, dingy sort of feminist tale. It's dark, it's grimy, it's vaguely magical, and the characters are absolutely wonderful. And I loved it. It's about this woman named Fevers, and she was born with wings. It does take place in the real world. She is an anomaly, with her feathers. She is very famous. She works as an aerialist or an acrobatist in a traveling circus, which is currently traveling throughout Europe. And the book is in 3 different parts, or maybe 4 different parts. The first part is Fevers telling her life story, pretty much. A young journalist by the name of Jack Walser is interviewing her, and it's one long interview that spans the whole night. And so the whole first part, you're getting her backstory. Fevers is the main character, but after you get through her life story, you do dive deeper into the rest of the cast of the circus, and you get all of their backstories, and it's really beautifully done. It's pretty much a really dark, dingy, surreal look into this circus and all of the people who are a part of this circus. The characters are fantastic. The way the actual story and the plot unravels and twists and turns is really interesting and really tragic and really beautiful, and there are lots of very pretty things in this book. There are lots of very kind of grotesque things in this book, and it just tells a really beautiful winding story, the whole time being very weird and surreal and wonderful. And like I said, only vaguely magical. There's a little bit of magic in this book, and it's really well done. It's really sparse and really well done. There are a couple of small love stories in this book, which are really nicely done. There is, I think my favorite part of this book, it's not like my favorite part of this book, but it's a part that very much impressed me, is there's a whole chapter on the clowns. Because like it's a circus, there's a bunch of clowns, and there's this one scene where Jack Walser, the journalist, he decides to join the circus, to travel with them. And he becomes a clown because it's like the easiest part to get hired as, is a random clown. So it's his first night in Clown Alley. And the head clown, the main clown, is kind of sitting at the head of the table with all the clowns during dinner time. It's described as this like kind of like Last Supper kind of banquet, but in a really like dingy, dark, dirty setting. And he kind of gives this like oral performance on what it is to be a clown, that's it, on what it is to be a clown. And it's so good. And if you've ever, I apologize now if you're like someone who's into the art of clowning or whatever, but if you have ever disliked clowns, if you've ever felt uncomfortable with clowns, if you've ever been kind of disgusted by clowns, sorry, I feel like that's mean. This part in this book about clowns is so well put, and it kind of like brought all of this stuff that is kind of repulsive to me about the whole clown thing and put it into words as like orated by a clown, and it was so good. It was so good. And I tabbed a bunch of stuff in this book because I liked a lot of the stuff in this book, and the writing in this book is absolutely beautiful and poetic and wonderful. And I thought this quote about clowns kind of summed up the whole chapter on clowns very well, and it's just like so concise. And this is it. The child's laughter is pure until he first laughs at a clown. That's it. Another quote I really liked from this book is just another super random one that I just thought was really great imagery and just a testament to like how good the writing in this book is. And it's this. In her red and black lace, it hurt the eyes to look at Fevers, and she was, besides, flushed and resplendent with the way she just snatched victory from disaster, erased the memory of the madman and the carnivore by the winged miracle of her presence. She was feeling supernatural tonight. She wanted to eat diamonds. That's like the whole book. That's like what you can expect from this book. It's so good. I love it. I loved it. If you like weird things, Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. This is a huge book. It's been around for a while. Lots of people have read it. It's very popular. The subtitle is A Brief History of Humankind. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. I listened to this as an audiobook. I started it, I think, in February maybe, or January possibly, and I just finished it in April. It took me a long time to listen to it. I mostly listened to it while I was like working and doing other things. I kind of like was listening to it, not almost on background, but kind of like that. So This book was great. I don't know. It was great. It was a nonfiction, like sprawling, overarching history of humanity, focusing on different aspects like how we went from hunter-gatherers to, what's the word? Agriculturalists or whatever. How we developed language and numbers and developing societies, and like why we started entering into the types of societies that we have done, and how it's developed from the old societies to current societies. And it's like all like humanities and history and some science and all that kind of stuff. It's a very sprawling history. And overall, I enjoyed it. I mean, I'm not a historian. I'm not an anthropologist. So a lot of this stuff was kind of just like, sure, okay, yeah, totally. But I really enjoyed reading it. I'm glad I did. I really enjoyed this author's writing style. A lot of it is kind of not quite funny, but kind of casual. He does a lot of this kind of scientific type of writing where he's like presenting a theory that I don't know if he's come up with, or if it's just like a real theory that's out there like beyond him and what he's writing. But he presents a theory and then he gives like all these like proofs and stuff, and it like goes on and on and on. So it becomes a little repetitive in that regard sometimes, but I get it. I get why he's doing it. But other times he explains his things that he's presenting in the form of a story, in the form of a hypothetical situation where like some tax collector in the Ottoman Empire, I'm going to get back to this, some tax collector in the Ottoman Empire, and like how they're going about their day, and like talking to whoever he needs to talk to like keep track of the taxes and stuff. And he's like telling like a little mini story about some random guy who like may or may not have existed. You know what I mean? Those parts I really enjoyed. Also, it's very interesting because he does use this example of of a tax collector in the Ottoman Empire, like going about his daily duties, being a regular person, right? And then I read that part like probably in, I don't know, February or March or something. Like that's some part that I read a couple months ago. And then this month when I picked up The Strange Library by Murakami, the book starts out with this kid going to the library looking for information on Ottoman Empire tax collectors. And I was like, what? What? It was weird. It was very weird. It's just a strange experience. It was a coincidence, but it was weird. Anyway, Sapiens was fun to read. It was great. It could be kind of boring if you're not into that kind of thing. I could totally understand that. It took me a long time to get through it, so there's that. I don't know. I think I gave it like 4 stars. Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Ugh, I think this was like the last Neil Gaiman book I hadn't read, and I loved it so much. I love Neil Gaiman. I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan. I love everything he's ever written, except for Sandman. Sandman is the one that I haven't read yet, but I have it on request from my library. I don't know if I'll ever get it. But yes, I listened to the audiobook. I always listen to the audiobook with Neil Gaiman because he always reads his own books, and his readings of his books is just absolutely beautiful, and I just can't read a physical copy of his books because I want to hear him tell me the story, and he's so brilliant. So Ocean at the End of the Lane is a story about a man who goes back to his hometown after having been away for a while, goes back for a funeral. He ends up driving around aimlessly. He ends up back at his old home, and then to this other house, which was one of his neighbor's houses, and kind of reconnects with one of the people there. As he's there visiting them, he's flooded with this very large, massive childhood memory that he had forgotten. And the whole book is him like reliving this memory. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's classic Neil Gaiman. It's dreamy. It's very magical. There's lots of magic and cool, like fantasy stuff in this book. It's dreamy. It's magical. It's really touching. It's like really like sweet. Neil Gaiman has this like way of writing things that can be so like harsh and cruel and sad. Like things that happen to people that are bad, and you're just like, you just want to cry, and then like in the next moment it's just like so heartwarming and touching and like wholesome and just like pure and beautiful and lovely and wonderful. This book is tragic and it's pretty and it's wonderful, and it made me cry a little bit, and it's just so, it was very good. I think at the heart of this book, it's kind of an exploration of like the disconnect between being a grown-up and being a child. It plays with this idea of like when you're an adult, you like had this whole childhood and you like remember a lot of stuff from your childhood, but you were kind of a different person, you know? If you just like plucked yourself out from the now and put yourself back to where you were a child, like that kid is not you now. It's like, and there's so much stuff that you don't like really remember. There's memories, but there's not like this full picture, like a story narrative of like the things that you did when you were a kid. And it's like, it's weird, you know? Like I have a 3-year-old daughter, and to me, she's lived like this crazy rich life full of like so much joy and sadness and emotion and learning, and like just so much stuff has happened to her in her 3 years. But when she's a grown-up, she's not going to remember any of it. Like she's 3, and I think all those memories are like, just like, that's it. Anyway, it's weird, and it's a cool exploration of that whole idea in this book, and it's wonderful. It's also a pretty short read, and it's just, it's incredible. 5 stars all around. Okay. The next book is Deathless Girls by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. This is, I think it's YA. It read to me as YA. I'm pretty sure it's YA. If it's not, it feels YA. It's a telling of Dracula's brides, pretty much. So Dracula has some brides. I don't remember the specifics of like his whole bride situation in like Dracula, which I loved. Dracula is a novel that I read a couple years ago. But he's got some brides, and this is the backstory of 2 of them. I typically love stuff like this. I really love deeper dives into minor characters of classic literature and classic mythologies. I love stuff like that, like a lot. Circe by Madeline Miller is like one of my favorites. It's brilliant. The Penelopead by Margaret Atwood is another one that does something like this, and that's also like one of my favorites of all time. I love it when authors do this, especially with minor women characters. And that's what this author has done. She's told the story of these 2 young girls who are from a traveler community in the land of Dracula, wherever that is. I don't know where it is. They're teenagers, their family's traveler camp gets raided, everyone gets killed, except for the kids. The kids and the teenagers all get taken, sold into slavery, and the story goes on from there. The 2 main characters are twins. They're like 17 or something like that. And it follows them and their journey from being traveler kids to being slaves to eventually becoming Dracula's 2 wives, 2 of his wives. And I didn't love it. Like it was, I don't know. I get it. I love what it was trying to do. I admire what it was trying to do. I think it could have been a really cool story. I just didn't love how she did it. Mostly, I think, because of the style that it was told in this kind of like YA fantasy style. It's just not a style I'm into. And I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting from this book, but I didn't love it. It was okay. I think I gave it like 3 stars. It was fine. It was okay. And like I said, I loved what she was trying to do, but I just found it kind of boring and like not my thing. So that's that. I don't know. If you're into like YA fantasy, like vampires and stuff like that, and I don't know, you might, I think a lot of people really like this book. I just didn't. It was okay. I don't know. And next, da 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 da. You know what this is? It's Rebecca. I did it. I read Rebecca. I read it. I talked about this before in a book video. This is like a favorite of all time of so many people. It's by Daphne du Maurier. It's a Gothic classic. It's written in the 30s. It's about an English countryside estate, and it's rich widower. It's a guy. He lost his wife. His wife died. So he's a widower or a widow. I don't know. No, he's a widower. But it's about him. He finds some girl that he decides to marry. She's very young. She's not from this kind of world of like high society estate classiness. And he brings her into this house, which is huge and empty except for all the servants. And stuff happens. It's gothic, it's dark, it's twisted, it's considered, I've heard people describe it as like a thriller and a mystery, and I would also throw in there some like investigative stuff. I guess that's mystery, I don't know. Police procedural kind of stuff scattered in there. And I'm just not into any of that stuff. But okay, so I read it. I had to read it because it's like everybody's favorite book, and I just wanted to, I kept thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I DNF'd it after like 20 pages the first time I tried to read it, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it, and so I picked it up and I read it. I half listened to it on audio and I half read the book. I listened to the audio at like 1.25 speed because I just like wanted to get through it. I was so like bleh as I was reading this one. I'm sorry, I know this is like your favorite book, but okay. This is a great book. It's everything I said. It's a gothic thriller, pretty much. The imagery is beautiful. It's mysterious, and it's there's an impending sense of dread throughout the whole book, and that's what it is. Yeah, so this young girl goes to live with this man in his giant house as his new wife after it's been a year since his first wife died. Everybody loved his first wife. His first wife was named Rebecca. The new wife is nameless. It's told from her point of view, and you never find out her name. Everybody loved Rebecca. The whole book is this new wife figuring out that she's taking the place of somebody who nobody's forgotten and nobody's going to forget. She is there, and her presence and her legacy is intertwined with the house, and it's never going to leave. So it's not a ghost story, but it pretty much is, it's the ghost of Rebecca is like the whole thing about this book. So Rebecca, she never left me. She is like still with me. She still haunts me. This is a good book. If this Rebecca person still haunts me and I didn't even like this book, it's a good book. It's very good. I see why everybody likes it. I get the appeal. It's brilliant. It's a completely brilliant piece of like mystery thriller fiction. I just happen to like not really like mystery thriller fiction. So I found this book a little bit tedious to get through. I didn't love it. I think I gave it 4 stars just because it is objectively a fantastic book. It's really good. It's really well written. The writing's beautiful. The story is brilliantly put together. It's the plot has these crazy twists and turns at the end, and the pacing is like so like it plays with you, you know? It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a wonderful book. I get why it's your favorite book of all time. It's beautiful. I just got bored. It wasn't my favorite book of all time, but it sticks with me. I swear, for like 3 days after I was done reading it, I couldn't get Rebecca out of my mind. I just kept walking around my house going, Rebecca! I don't know. That's how good the book is. It's good. If you're into gothic literature, if you're into thrillers or mysteries or like creepy, dready things, like you should read it because it's wonderful and everybody loves it. But if you really don't care about things like that, I don't know, maybe you should read it anyway. I have no idea. I was really, really excited to get a digital ARC copy of Becky Chambers' new book, which is coming out in July. So it's not even out yet, and I read it. It's called A Prayer for the Crown Shy. It's the second in the Monk and Robot series. I read the first one as soon as it came out. I love Becky Chambers. I'm a huge Becky Chambers fan. And I got this copy early of the second one, so I was really excited. I read it. It's very short and it's very good. I read it in like a day, I think, and it's a science fiction novel, and it continues following the story of a robot and a monk who meet up and go traveling around the land together. So it's kind of one of these like short little like philosophical kind of allegorical things. It's very cozy, it's very comforting. It's just kind of the monk and the robot going around to different villages, talking to people and doing things and discussing life. And very it's very cute and it's very grounding, and there's not a lot of like crazy plot stuff. It's mostly just conversations and musings on life. It was very good and I loved it. I really, really liked it. And if you like Becky Chambers, you should probably definitely read it as soon as it comes out, because you're going to get through it like that and it's going to be fun. Okay, the last 3 books I'm going to talk about, I know I said 9 and 3 books more makes 10, but I read I read 3 books out of order is what I did. So Emily St. John Mandel is an author that I'd never read before. She has a brand new book that came out this month called The Sea of Tranquility. And I've been curious about this author for a while, but I know almost nothing about her or her books. That's supposed to be past tense. So I was like, what better way to read her than to read her brand new book that's coming out right now? So I got her new book, Sea of Tranquility. I read it and I fell in love with it. It was brilliant and I loved it. And so I picked up her next like most popular book, which is Station 11. And I read that and I was like, oh my God, this book is so amazing. And there's so many weird connections between these 2 books. And I'm going to talk about this stuff in a minute, but I just got to tell you the story. And I thought it was so cool how she did one thing and then another thing in the other book, and there's kind of opposites, and I thought it was great. And then I read her next book, which I thought was like kind of related to those 2 books, called The Glass Hotel. And I was like, oh, I should have read these in order. So the 3 books by Emily St. John Mandel. Glass Hotel I actually read this month, which is May, so I'm combining months here. But I have to talk about all these 3 books together because they are all connected and related in the coolest way ever, like ever. I loved them. Okay, so they're all kind of like under this sci-fi arc. They're not all like sci-fi, but they're all kind of under this sci-fi arc. So the way that she released them and the order in which I kind of wish I would have read them was Station 11, then The Glass Hotel, then Sea of Tranquility. I'm not going to talk like too much about the details of all these books, but oh my gosh, they're so good. So the thing that strings, there's a lot of things. I don't even know. Okay, so the first book, Station 11, it's very popular. You've probably heard of it. There's like a show about it that's supposed to be really good. I haven't watched it yet, but I want to. So it's a post-apocalyptic dystopian fiction novel, a pandemic. This book was written pre-COVID, and a pandemic happens, and like 90% of the world dies. So pretty much the world that you are in is this post-pandemic apocalypse, and you're following this, and there's people around, but it's like people have had to start over because society collapsed, and so people are kind of living the way you would expect them to live in a post-apocalyptic dystopian novel, right? In like bands and troops and like little villages that like, you know, people are living in gas stations and McDonald's and stuff like that. So you're following this troupe of Shakespearean actors and musicians. And these people travel around in this very cool caravan of like trucks that they have taken the engines out of, and they're being pulled by horses, and it's very cool. The imagery of this caravan is amazing. So they travel around this whole like little small section of America, which is around the Great Lakes. And they travel around and they do Shakespeare plays and they play music for people. And that's what they do. And you're kind of flashing back and forth between post-pandemic and pre-pandemic worlds. And you're essentially just following certain characters. And you're presented with all these characters who do their normal life things in whatever world that they're living in, and you're eventually seeing all the connections form between all these people and how they've affected each other's lives. That's pretty much the book. It's amazing. It's so good. I love it. It's a very good piece of dystopian fiction. It's a very good piece of like character-based character study fiction. It's so good. It's so good. And then the next book is The Glass Hotel. This book takes place pre-pandemic, but in a world where that pandemic was contained and didn't end the world. So you're following mostly different characters, but there are some of the same characters from Station 11. And this book is much more set in reality. It's more like a crime novel, kind of. And you're following just these other characters doing other things. There's like a big Ponzi scheme that kind of ties the whole narrative together. And normally I don't like crime fiction, but I loved this book. It was so good because it was more of the thing. There's like this unifying like point of the book. Like in the first one, it was like the world ended and now what? And in this one, it's this like big crime that's happening, but mostly you're just following characters and like learning about them and getting to know them and like entering into their lives and like seeing how their lives and what they do affect other people's lives and stuff like that. It's a very intertwining story. Like the other one, it jumps around all over the world. It jumps around timelines. And the kind of sci-fi thing about this book is there's ghosts. There's not many ghosts. It's not like a huge part of the story. It's not a ghost story. It's just like kind of trickled in here and there, and it like connects certain things, and it's very cool. Now, the third book, Sea of Tranquility, which was the first one that I read, it's a book about time travel. So the thing about this book that's kind of tying the narrative together is this like thing that's happening, and there's time travelers in the way distant future who have to investigate. They go back in time and they're investigating this like weird anomaly in the space-time continuum. And there are a few different main characters that you're following. And again, it's just this like study of all these different characters and how they affect each other and how what they're doing affects what other people get to do later. And this one spans like about 600 years. It starts off in like Canada in 1915 or something like that. And then it goes off 600 years into the future when we as humans have colonies on the moon and on other distant, more farther places into space. And we've developed space travel, colonies, time travel, and we've lived through several pandemics. Pandemics are a huge theme in this one too. Now this one was just written this last year, and so like I think it's just really cool the way these tie together because this author wrote this crazy pandemic novel pre-COVID, and then after COVID she wrote this other novel that has heavily to do with pandemics and the history of pandemics. But the thing is that it just presents pandemics as something that humanity has to like live through every once in a while, and we're fine and we go on to live on the moon and stuff like that. One of the main characters in The Sea of Tranquility is an author of a pandemic post-apocalyptic novel who suddenly gets famous for writing this pandemic post-apocalyptic novel, and then she's book touring for it in the midst of a pandemic. It's all very weird. It's a really beautiful exploration of, I don't know, of humanity in general and how we deal with things. And if you're going to read one of these books, I would say read them all. I think you could read them all as standalone novels, but they really just belong together. They all share characters. All three books share characters, and it's very cool because there's, among all these books, the themes, the sci-fi themes that she explores are parallel universes, which are very real in this series. Time travel, dystopian fiction, post-apocalypse stuff, and ghosts. And they're just all done so, like in a realistic way, like not in a surreal way, not in like a weird, like magical way. It's all just very grounded and very real, set in the real world where just this other stuff happens. It's so good. Like seriously, I think this like series of 3 Emily St. John Mandel books is my favorite thing that I've read in a really long time. They're all very up my alley. Like this is my kind of science fiction. I loved it. 5 stars. 5 stars to those 3 books. I fell in love with the world. I fell in love with all of the characters, even the sucky ones. They're just brilliant. I loved it. I'm so impressed by this whole concept of this world that she's created in these books. Very cool, super cool. Read them. So that's it. That's everything I read in the month of April. It was a great reading month. It was a really great reading month. I love almost everything I read, and I'm very happy with how many books I read too. It was a lot. It was a lot for me. So, what are you reading? I would love to know. I want to know what's on your to be read list too. Let me know what you're thinking about, what you're interested in. And if you've read any of the books that I talked about today, please tell me about it. Let me know in the comments below. And I will see you in the next video. If you liked this video, if you like book videos, please let me know. Give it a thumbs up if you're into it, and subscribe if you haven't already. I am really loving talking about books lately. I hope you're okay with it too. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for being here.